Hi, I'm Mike Zyda, and today's talk is not technical. It's entitled 23 and Me and Me. And let's put up the slides so that we can go and follow those. All right, let's hit play. All right, 23 and Me and Me. I'm Mike Zyda, 30th of June, 2024. Why did I sign up for 23 and Me? Well, I was kind of interested in what was my ancestry. If you ever talk to my mother, and she's long gone, she would just say from her side was completely Irish. And you would go to and she'd point out to my father's side and said his family came from Austria-Hungary, which became Czechoslovakia, which later became the Czech Republic. And that's it. And I signed up for 23andMe to say, where were our ancestors really from? And it's quite different from those answers. And so let's kind of walk through it. So 23andMe, you spit into a test tube and you mail it off to them, and it comes back with an email to you saying, hey, we've got your DNA relatives, we've got your ancestry report. Why don't you log on and take a look? So I'm going to show you some of the key parts of that and some of the more recent exciting parts of that. And it'll be kind of neat. And I'll also tell you my experience with 23andMe. So start out, here's the ancestry composition. And this is a cool picture. If you look at this, what you see as British and Irish, 51.3%. Okay, so there's some Irish, but it's a lot of British. German, French and German, 8.2%. And they actually tell you what particular regions of France and Germany are there. Broadly Northwestern European. And that color, all of those colors, all of those Northwestern European include Scandinavia. Basically, you've got Norway, you've got Sweden, you've got the other countries there. You'll see the Faroe Islands are there. You'll see the United Kingdom and Ireland is in that. Some of Spain and France, and it's kind of cool. Eastern European 30.9%, which is Lesser Poland or Prague, Czech Republic. Southern European, 2.1%, Italian, 1.2%, Greek and Balkan, 0.8%, broadly Southern European, 0.1%, Ashkenazi Jewish, 0.1%. And then there's this broadly European, 2.7%, and 0.1% unassigned. So you get this kind of a cool map of where people are from, and you can go and, see what counties of Ireland your family is from. I didn't put that on this set of slides. It's a little bit more detail than I think you need. You get another thing called DNA relatives, and these are relatives that you share some DNA with. So what I find in mine was there were 2 close relatives and 4,998 distant relatives. So where do those people come from? Well, we look North America, large numbers of people. You can see Hawaii, there's 2 people. There's somebody in Colombia down there. If you go over to Europe, what you'll find is it doesn't look like there's a lot of Europeans, but what you find when you go and watch a couple of videos that compare the different DNA companies, 23andMe is mostly United States down to Central America and a little bit of Europe, but not all of Europe. Okay. So you can kind of see this in Europe. When you break it out, you'll see, oh, there's people from Switzerland. There's people from Czechia, which is now the Czech Republic. You'll see people from the United Kingdom and Ireland. And you'll even see someone, I think, all the way off in the Marshall Islands. So you get this kind of interesting map of stuff. And DNA relatives, you get this big list. And it's in order of who are your first cousins, who are your second cousins, who are your third cousins, who are your fourth cousins, down to who are your fifth cousins, and that's kind of where they stop. And you'll get stuff like second cousin once removed, and who knows what that means, removed to where. Anyway, I had a little fun trying to talk to some of these people. I know who Catherine Court is. I don't know Joe Schneebs. I never heard of Barbara Taylor. And Roberta Wilhelm, I kind of knew. So I sent a note. You can actually send a note to each of these people through a secret email channel they have. And I sent her a note and I didn't get a response for months. And what I did get a response from was her father. And that response was very interesting because basically he had a whole uh, list of all of my relatives that had been in somebody's Bible, which was kind of cool, all the way back to 1844 when Julius Caspar Werder came over to the United States from Switzerland, of all places. And when the Civil War started, he joined the North and fought with the North against the South in the Civil War. And so if you look at him, there's some other people I want to talk about, Bruce Feldman, Barbara Taylor as well. But if you look at Roberta Wilhelm, I've never met her. She born in 1960. She lives in Omaha, Nebraska, and her father said he had signed her up for it. And so he was the one monitoring the thing, and he was very kind and sent me information. But you look, she's listed as second cousin. It means we have shared great grandparents, and I have no idea. I've never met my great grandparents because they're long past by the time I was old enough to think about who were they. Um, so she's listed as being in my family tree. Bruce Feldman. Now, this is a strange one. When you get this giant list of people, when I first joined 23andMe, most of the people who signed up for it signed up with two initials like MZ. And you think, oh, who's MZ? What does that mean? So I kind of remember going through the list, skimming really fast, looking to see, was there anybody with a full name in there? And I came across this name, Bruce Feldman. I said, my gosh, Bruce Feldman was born in 1954, and my best friend in third grade was this guy named Bruce Feldman. And so I sent him a note and came back with Zyda. Now, this is a kid who in third grade, he and I used to walk home from elementary school. He lived like 3 blocks from my parents' house. His father worked for my father. And so he'd come over to my house and we'd play until my mom got driven crazy by him because he's kind of an ADD person. And she would kick him out and say, go away. I need to get some sleep because I have to go to work at 10 p.m. tonight. She was an operating room nurse. So all of a sudden, he is listed as a 5th cousin. We have shared 4th great grandparents, which of course neither of us has ever met. And I sent him a note and said, hey, how come we're relatives? And no one ever said that because probably nobody knew. But when I sent him that email note, I was living at 610 South Main Street near the corner of 6th and South Main in downtown Los Angeles. And I asked him where he worked, and he said, my office was at 9th and South Main Street, 3 blocks away. This is very funny. It makes you think of, are we in the Matrix? This guy's close by, and he was close by before. What's up? But he had just retired, and he lives in Santa Monica, and we had a great, wonderful conversation. And he sent me a bunch of old pictures of him after he was in college and how he toured the world and taking trains all over the place. It was a great, great conversation. So there's some fun in 23andMe. No, this next one is really strange. This woman sent me a note, and I'll just read you her post there. Barbara Taylor. It says, hello, I was adopted. I do not know anything about my birth parents. If you have some sense of where I come from, please reach out. I'm not looking to disrupt anyone's life, nor am I interested in asking for anything. I do know I was adopted from Holly Hill, Florida. I am down to earth and doing this on a whim. So I actually talked to her by the text message system in line. She and I have shared great grandparents. And she was asking me, do I know who the shared great grandparents were? And at that time, I had not joined Ancestry.com, so I had no idea, but it was really strange. So we are second cousins. She was adopted. She was dropped off at this orphanage, Holly Hill in Florida. And she was kind of looking like, who are my relatives? So 23andMe can be interesting, can be fun. You can see people you never heard about and stories like this. So I kind of think 23andMe is kind of interesting. It's fun. The real question is, how accurate is it? And just in the last 2 months, I got this note from 23andMe saying, meet your historical matches. We just have been going through this big list of DNA matches from burial grounds of various party people in the world. And they found 13 historical matches that matched some of my DNA. And what was interesting to me is they had me in the Viking period, which is the time of the Vikings. And what you'll find is that I'm related to, it says Vendel period seafaring warriors during 700 Common Era to 800 Common Era. Common Era is the same as AD, and AD is Anno Domino, but after what is that? After death of Jesus Christ, and the rest of the world wants to just call it Common Era. That's what it means. And Vendel period is the period, right? It's the 100 years right before what is commonly called the Viking era. And so this is very interesting. And I'm going to get more into this in a bit. And what you'll see is each of these cards, they look like cards, tells you here's early modern period, Faroese infant, born 1500 to 1700 on the Faroe Islands. Okay, so remember, these are believed to be Viking era, Vikings who are somewhere off in the world. And Faroe Islands is this little island out in the middle of the ocean. I'll point you it on a map in a little bit. So I have 1, 2, 3 relatives who are all infants, who are all buried in the Faroe Islands. And it's kind of interesting. And we have some shared segment. The seafaring warriors are buried in Estonia, and they're from this period of 700 to 800 Common Era. And the Estonia story is going to be interesting. I'm going to go through that in some detail here. When you flip these cards over, they have the whole story on the back. So on the website, you can see that. Here's a Viking Age individual, 850 CE to 900 CE from Denmark, born in Denmark. This is one who's 800 CE to 1100 CE. Sometimes when they do the DNA test, there's some damage, and they figure out the date based on what they find, the way they're buried, and the DNA testing by drilling into their tooth or this very hard bone that's in the ear of the skeleton that's left, and they get the DNA out of that. There's another Viking Age individual from Sweden. There's a Viking Age individual from Denmark. There's in 995 to 1029 Common Era. And they know it really narrow in that narrow time because there was something going on in that piece of land beforehand. There was something going on afterwards, and in between time, this distant relative was buried in that place. Then there's migration period individual, and this is in the 400 to 600 Common Era. This is a long time ago. This is 400 years after, Jesus Christ's death or something like that. And this is kind of interesting. In Norway, migration period is when people are leaving the cold parts of the world and going somewhere else. And the precise town is on the back of each of these cards. Another Viking Age individual. Let's keep going. And then there's another early Viking Age, 700 to 1000 Common Era, Denmark. Viking Age individual, 800 to 900 female. And Viking Age individual, Denmark female, 850 to 950. What is the Viking Age? We should at least read through this. The name Vikings refers to seafaring people originally from Scandinavia, which is present-day Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, who lived during the 8th to 11th centuries. Now remember, the 8th century is the year 700, okay? That's always hard for people to remember. And the 11th century is the year 1000s. Renowned for their sailing skills and distinctive longships, the Vikings' presence in Scandinavia, the North Atlantic, and Baltic Sea areas was so profound that the period roughly between 800 to 1050 Common Era in these regions is commonly referred to as the Viking Age. And 700 to 800 is the Vendel period. And Vendel period is named after a town in Sweden where there was the first discovered ship burial, where all of the Vikings were sliced up with swords and put in a ship and buried in sand and put out into the ocean to sink. All right. During this time, the Vikings raided, settled in, and traded with others from these and even more distinct regions, including the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Middle East, and even reaching North America. And during their travels, the Vikings not only impacted the culture of many regions, but also left a genetic legacy. All right, that's kind of cool. So when you go down into 23andMe, you'll get this giant list. It says all profiles in this group, and you'll see the first 13 here. I have a yes in the match in the right-hand column, and that's where for Estonia, Faroe Islands, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Denmark. And then after that, United Kingdom, Greenland, Iceland, all the other places, all the way out to Russia, there are no matches of my DNA. It's just this group of people. It's kind of interesting. And I drew this map. I took this map out of Apple Maps, and you'll see the VK numbers. I put them off here onto the map so you can kind of see that the DNA relatives, and there's 13 of them who are historical matches. Most of them are in Denmark. So you go down to Denmark, or they're just across the water in Norway, or they're just across the water in this little island off of Sweden, where VK443 is. And then you'll see the part VK512, VK549, who are in Estonia. In fact, they're barely in Estonia. There's a big island off of Estonia on its left-hand side here. And then underneath there is another little island. And that little island has an isthmus that's in between it and that big island. And the two ships that were buried, put chopped up bodies into them, and then filled with sand, that was actually water that is originally. And the oceans, the seas there have dropped. And so what happened is these ships ended up being on land and being covered with sand, and they were dug up when somebody was going to make a bicycle track, and they discovered these bodies underneath, and it's pretty cool. If you go over here to Norway, in the upper part, you'll see VK419 in the years 500 to 1000 Common Era. This is in the migration period. And you could say, this is above the Arctic Circle. Of course, you want to migrate out of there, right? And VK525, 800 to 900 Common Era, he is way up there as well. So, and down here, right at the meeting place of Norway and Sweden, there's VK390 and 400 to 600 Common Era. And again, a lot of these bodies are discovered in the naves of churches, which meant they were, for the most part, they were known to the church, and they were pretty distinguished, so they were buried inside the nave of the church. And again, the one on the far left here, you can see the Faroe Islands, VK 234, 236, 238, from 1500 to 1700 Common Era. And it's right above the United Kingdom, and there's a little tiny island there. And this is, if you go look at, I'm going to show you a map of where the Vikings all went to. The Vikings went out to sea, and they would stop at the Faroe Islands, and of course they would leave some genetic legacy. They'd go to Iceland, they'd go next to Greenland, and then they would head off towards North America, up in the northern territories of Canada, which is kind of cool. So this has been fun experiment. This picture I found on the internet, World History Encyclopedia. Thank you for letting me put it in here. And what you'll see is these little buildings where the Vikings had big places, and the Vikings had big places in London and York and Dublin. And you'll see they came out, they went up the Baltic Sea, and the Danes went and attacked, went into the United Kingdom, and which probably wasn't called the United Kingdom at that time, and they went all kinds of places, and it's kind of neat. But you also see that they left, from Norway towards Shetland Island, towards the Faroe Islands, towards Iceland, towards the eastern settlement and western settlement on Greenland, and then up to the Hudson Strait above Canada, and down to Vinland, which is part of Canada as well, the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Well, it's very cool. Let's talk a little bit about the Vendel period seafaring warriors. I just say, you know what, 700 to 800 is really the Viking era. And this particular warrior was buried in one of two ship burials that were discovered near the present-day village of Salme on the island of Saaremaa in Estonia. And the first of the two ship burials was discovered in 2008. And when a trench was dug as part of the construction of a cycling track, and the remains of 7 individuals were identified on board the ship. And this discovery prompted intensive archaeological investigations that unearthed a second ship burial upon which the remains of 34 individuals were buried. Historians hypothesized that the Salme ships were used to bury warrior seafarers who died during an armed conflict in the 8th century. And the Salme individuals were buried with a rich assortment of grave goods, including highly decorated swords, arrowheads, and shields with iron bosses. Analysis of strontium isotopes sampled from their skeletons suggest that the warriors may have originally come from central Sweden. DNA analysis revealed that most of the individuals buried at this site shared genetic similarities to contemporary populations from Sweden, providing further support for the hypothesis that the Salme individuals may have originated from Sweden. Based on the weapons and other artifacts found among the ship burials, archaeologists dated the burials to the late Vendel period, 650 to 790 CE, a period in which, in Swedish prehistory, named after another famous ship, burial in Vendel, Sweden. In Vendel period, seafaring warrior VK 512 was buried on the second of the two ships at Salme, which was excavated between 2010 and 2011. Through DNA analysis, he was identified as genetically male, as were all of the other individuals from this site whose DNA was studied. Now, the other interesting thing is Viking Warrior 549 is also on ship number 2. All right. And he's buried on that second ship, and he is genetically male, and he and the previous 512, I share DNA with these two individuals. So I'm going to, now there is a scientist who has looked at all of these two ships, and they have started calling them the first Vikings. And they'd say 2 remarkable ships may show that the Viking storm was brewing long before their assault on England and the continent, which basically means we have to call the Viking Age from not from 800 to 1100 Common Era. We have to call it from 700. And that's sort of what it is. The link for this article is there. And this is from the first boat. Now, what's interesting is the bodies are placed in the boat. The boat was filled with sand, and it was on the water when it was filled in. And Salmon number 1 was rowed. It was not sailed. So it was a rowboat. And when it got buried with sand, the ocean dropped in level. And so this ship ended up being on sand, and various erosions from the ocean and from winds buried both boats, Salme 1 and 2 boats. And so what they've done is you can see the outline of the boat because that's where all the nails and screws that held the boat together sit. But the wood is all rotted away and disappeared. And the thing left is the skeleton. In boat number 1, the skeletons were tossed in haphazardly, which basically meant they couldn't fit them all in. Salme boat 2 is orderly. Boat 1 is disorderly, which means they ran out of time. They had to throw them all, the remaining bodies, into boat 1 and then get out of there. The carefully stacked remains of 33 men were buried in the ship that brought them from Scandinavia to an Estonian island more than a century before the Vikings are thought to have been able to sail across such distances. And these pictures are very cool. And again, you'll see they're very close. In the middle credit says, the higher ranking of the carefully interred warriors of Salme II were buried with their impressive double-edged iron swords lying neatly between them, which is pretty cool. On the left-hand side, you'll see, though the wood from both boats had almost completely decayed and disappeared, archaeologists were able to trace the ship's outlines using the iron rivets that remained. In addition to their weapons, the men on both vessels were buried with gaming pieces above, including rectangular dice. So you can see rectangular dice there. You can see another kind of dice there, and then you can see other game pieces that maybe were for a go board or something like that. Yuri Pietz, who's that gentleman in the upper right-hand corner, his picture, he is the archaeologist who uncovered Salme II. He's in his lab at the University of Tallinn with some of the artifacts recovered from the ship. And this is a cool picture. It's just an arm bone, shows evidence of having been sliced by a sharp weapon in combat. So these guys who were on these ships were killed in combat from swords. This is pretty cool, including evidently two of my relatives. If you go into academia.edu, you'll find a lot of papers by Jerry Pietz. I think that's how you say his name, including this one, Archaeological Investigations of Pre-Viking Age Burial Boat in Salme Village at Saramea. And there's a lot of information, including the radiocarbon age of everything, the the years they believe it was placed there, and very cool. And I think the cool thing is when you see this, the first thing that went into my mind is this is a pretty famous event. And I have two relatives who are on the boat. And I said, there must be a museum. Now there is a museum in Estonia, in Salme, which has a lot of all of these artifacts in it. And there are a whole host of papers. And they basically are starting to call these the first Vikings, which I think is cool. So they're relatives. Again, get back to this picture. You can see this map just lists Estonia as part of Poland, which is kind of funny. And so it's oh, wait a second, I had that wrong. It's listed as part of Kievan, Russia, which is founded by the Vikings. And it's the upper left-hand part of that. There's a big island, then there's an isthmus, and then the little tiny island that are now modern-day Estonia. All right, let's look at some of these in date order, because not all of these cards are from Vikings. They're in the Viking Age, and they're not warriors. Only two of them evidently seem to be warriors. This is VK 390. Born during the migration period, which is 400 to 600 CE. This is a long time ago. This is in Norway, in Sondre, Mela, Skien, Telemark, Norway. I think that's how you say it. And what's interesting is this individual was found buried with an adult female between the ages of 18 to 30. This individual was 30 to 50. And they were buried with two non-cruciform brooches, which archaeologists believe date to the migration period. So the non-cruciform means they're not a cross, as for Jesus. They're for, some other artistic purpose. The migration period is marked by large-scale migrations throughout Europe, including the movement of Germanic tribes northwards into Scandinavia, in case you didn't know that. This is VK419. This is a male 500 to 1000 CE, and what you'll find is sometimes they have a big gap. This is a 500-year gap time period. And the burial location is Randvik over Bodo, Nordland, Norway. So Bodo is a town, has a giant airport, everything still there. This individual's grave was excavated from a coastal site in the northwest of present-day Norway in 1889, a long time ago. VK419's remains were found beneath two large stone slabs that were used to mark his grave. Through analysis of his skeletal remains and DNA, researchers identified VK419 as an adult male who likely died between ages 17 and 25 years old. Based on the artifacts that he was buried with, an axe and a sickle, archaeologists believe that he lived during the migration period 300 to 800 CE or Viking Age 850 to 1050 CE. However, they're unable to narrow the date range any further. So they didn't have enough surrounding information of the body to be able to really tell what was the precise time. This is a VK70, time period 700 to 1000 CE. This is 300-year period, buried in Tolmosgard, Zealand, Denmark. This individual was one of at least 54 individuals buried in a cemetery in the northern part of Zealand in present-day Denmark. The site was excavated in 1997, and during the excavations, archaeologists discovered a variety of artifacts in the graves, including knives, beads, nails, and sacrificed animals. Based on the type of grave goods that they uncovered, archaeologists believe that the cemetery was in use during the late Germanic and early Viking Age periods, 700 to 1000 CE. Researchers determined that VK70 was genetically male by analyzing DNA extracted from his tooth. That seems to be the most common way to get DNA from very old graves like this. Here is Vandal period seafaring warrior VK512, once again from Salme. This is VK549, again from Salme in Estonia. This is Viking Age individual VK443, whose burial location is in Boda, Åland, Sweden, 800 to 1100 Common Era. Again, that's a 300-year period. And this individual's remains were excavated from a site in Boda parish on the island of Åland in present-day Sweden. Åland is the second largest island in Sweden and is located just off the southeastern coast of the Scandinavian peninsula. As of 1972, the island has been connected to the mainland by a 3.5-mile long bridge. Archaeological investigations of late Iron Age populations in Åland suggest that many of the island's inhabitants were non-local, as the strontium and oxygen isotopes sampled from their remains did not match local signatures, indicating that they spent their early lives somewhere else. Viking Age individual VK443 was buried laying on his back with his arms and legs outstretched in a coffin-style burial, which was excavated in 1935. Through analysis of his skeletal remains and DNA, researchers identified him as a young adult male who died around the age of 23 years old. Examination of his skull revealed the presence of porotic hyperostosis and excess of spongy or porous bone, indicating that he may have suffered from anemia. Isotopes from the Viking Age individual 443 remains indicate he did not grow up in the local area. That's what you find about these people who are listed as Viking Age individuals, is where they're buried is not where they grew up. Here's 525. This is a female, time period 800 to 900 CE. That's a pretty narrow window, from Hove, Dona Island, Nordland, Norway. Her grave was discovered in 1922 when workers were digging a trench to bring water to a nearby farm building. And the coastal burial site is located on the island of Dona in present-day Norway, approximately 50 meters from the beach. Through analysis of her skeletal remains and DNA, VK525 was identified as an adult woman who died around the age of 20 to 30 years old. She was buried with a number of artifacts, including a knife, sickle, and 2 oval brooches, which date to the 9th century CE. Several of the bones near her chest had a green discoloration, likely the result of staining from the brooches, which were made of a copper alloy. Viking Age individual VK294, from Bakendrup, Zealand, Denmark, 850 to 950 CE. 294 was buried in a simple unmarked pit grave near the present-day region of Bakendrup in the western part of the island of Zealand in Denmark. The site was excavated in 1979 by researchers from the National Museum of Denmark. Based on the style of burial, researchers believe that VK294 likely died during the second half of the 9th century. By analyzing DNA extracted from her tooth, researchers determined that VK294 was genetically female. Okay, here's Viking Age individual VK384 from 850 to 900 CE, buried in Hesselberg, Jutland, Denmark. Was buried in the Hesselberg Cemetery in the eastern coast of Jutland Peninsula in present-day central Denmark. The site is named for the family farm upon which it was discovered. While Viking artifacts were found at the farm as early as 1932, formal excavations of the site did not begin until 1963, following the discovery of bronze jewelry by metal detector hobbyists. The excavations led by researchers at the Mosegard Museum uncovered 104 graves containing 84 inhumation burials and 20 cremations. I guess inhumation means they just buried the body. A variety of artifacts, including pottery, knives, iron and bronze belt buckles, glass and amber beads, and jewelry were also discovered at the site. Notably, over 80% of the individuals buried in the cemetery or identified as female. The stark sex bias has led archaeologists to speculate about what might have happened to the men who lived at the nearby settlement of Randlev. For instance, some hypothesize that they may have died while carrying out raids of neighboring regions. So the Vikings were off raiding, their women were at home and they died and got buried, and the men were off somewhere else. All right. VK 324, 995 CE to 1029 CE. Viking Age individual 324 was buried in a Viking Age cemetery in the town of Ribe in Denmark. Founded around 700 CE, Ribe is considered Denmark's oldest town, and it served as an economic hub during the 8th and 9th centuries. The cemetery in which VK 324 was buried was located next to Ribe Cathedral, which is believed to have been founded in 860 CE by a monk from Hamburg named Ansgar. Archaeologists discovered evidence of an ancient settlement dating to around 1050 CE, overlaying the Viking Age cemetery, providing a firm date for the latest period when the cemetery could have been used. Okay, here are the Faroese infants from 1500 CE to 1700 CE. Now, the burial location is on Sandoy, Faroe Islands. Sandoy is an island that doesn't have a town. It's a little tiny island next to the bigger, somewhat bigger island. This VK234 was one of 23 individuals who were buried in the nave or central part of a medieval church in the village of Sandur in the Faroe Islands. According to local legends, during the Viking Age, 850 to 1050 CE, the village was home to a man named Snillavr. I don't know how to say that, who fled to the Faroe Islands from the Hebrides after being accused of manslaughter. So we got a murderer guy here. Archaeological excavations of the village have revealed a number of noteworthy finds dating to the Viking Age, including the remains of 3 large farms and the graves of 12 high-ranking, high-status Viking Age individuals. The village is also the site of 2 medieval period churches. The first was erected in the 11th century CE and was later replaced by a much larger church during the late 12th or early 13th century CE. Medieval period Faroese infant VK234 was buried in the nave of the second church, along with 7 adults, all over the age of 35, and 15 children, all but one of whom likely died during their first year of life. During the medieval period, it was typical for only members of the clergy to be buried inside the walls of a church, so archaeologists were surprised to discover a mixture of men, women, and children buried in this distinguished location inside a church. A possible explanation of this unique group of burials could be that the church was privately owned, and that the family of the individuals buried within it owned the church. DNA analysis provides support for this hypothesis, as researchers identified a number of genetic relatives among the 16 individuals whose DNA they sequenced from this site. Through analysis of his skeletal remains and DNA, researchers identified medieval period Faroese infant VK234 as genetically male and determined that he died during infancy. He was buried in a medieval-style trapezoid-shaped coffin made of wood alongside a group of young children, many of whom are predicted to be his close relatives, including individuals who are likely his brother, VK225, sister, VK236, half-brother, VK242, and uncle, VK238. So I think we have 236 and 238 here, so I don't think I need to go through those, but they're off in the Faroe Islands. You know, the Faroe Islands, you can see on the left middle of the map picture here. And the Faroe Islands are on the way to Iceland, to Greenland, and to North America and the Hudson Strait. So it's kind of cool to see this. Oh, you know, this has nothing to do with reality. The movie The Vikings, this is the first movie my father took me to. We went to a drive-in theater, I think the Van Nuys Drive-in Theater in the San Fernando Valley, and we went and watched The Vikings. And when this came out, a long time ago, has nothing to do with 23andMe. All right. Anyway, that's the end of my talk on 23andMe. Next, I'm going to try and go into Ancestry.com a little bit. What I've discovered in Ancestry.com, if you play with it and you follow all of the links out to where they go, you can get my family's link all the way out to 1500. And Ancestry.com, all of their people who are there and their relatives, there's a piece of paper in a church or a government or somewhere that lists these dates for these people, even the exact birth date. So you can kind of see this. And we'll talk in a different time on this. Right now, I just threw in a couple of slides. This is the first one I got that I thought was super exciting because the paperwork on it says Mary Iron in the upper left-hand corner. She lived from 1702 to 1736, not very long. I think she died in childbirth is what it is. And uh, she's listed as her original name is Iron Mary, which I thought was absolutely cool. For some reason, they listed in the paperwork the last name first and then the first name, which is backwards from how we do it nowadays. Anyway, if you have any questions, here's my email address. There's my website. If you are on WeChat, there is the QR code. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to mail them to me. 23andMe has been a lot of fun. And the historical stuff, they've got a whole lot of other types of DNA from other places, including Aztec burials from people who were sacrificed to the gods, which I thought I'm happy that none of my relatives were there, but maybe your relatives are there. Anyway, that's all I have to say. You guys have a great day. I'll stop sharing this. And this has been great fun. Anyway, 23andMe, you can also, Ancestry.com also has its own DNA sequencing. My brother did that. I did 23andMe, and his results may vary. Anyway, have a great day.